This is Katia. She was denied a job recently because her employer feared she might go on maternity leave. Taras was employed instead of Katia. For the sake of this position, he had to give up his dream job because it was poorly paid, and Taras was sure he had to earn a lot to provide for his family. Both Taras and Katia are very upset that they cannot fulfill their potential. They both suffered from gender stereotypes in society.
Gender role stereotypes are when a person is expected to act in a certain way based on society's expectations related to their gender. Traditional gender roles go back to a time when there were clear and, at times, unequal rules about how people were expected to act based on their gender.
It begins when we absorb our gender roles at birth or even earlier, and this process continues through childhood and beyond. We call this gender socialization, and adults such as parents and caregivers help to pass these gendered expectations onto the next generation. When raising children, adults may directly tell boys not to cry. They may tell girls to take care of their younger siblings as girls are expected to be nurturing. Girls may be given dolls while boys are given cars. Girls may be praised for their looks or kindness while boys are praised for strength or intelligence. It's not only what adults say, but how they behave that teaches gendered behaviors. Children may observe only women and girls doing domestic and caring work. By seeing this, they may absorb the idea that men should be the earners and breadwinners. Gender socialization shapes what girls and boys should do, but also what they are not expected to do. In this way, gender socialization can create stereotypes and inequalities.
People who were born male were expected to be strong and aggressive, not emotional, and, of course, to love sports. People who were born female were expected to be kind and nurturing, emotional, and domestic, meaning they were all supposed to be able to cook and clean. Additionally, strict stereotypes about gender police people's emotions. Girls are not expected to show anger, and boys aren't supposed to be empathetic, nurturing, or vulnerable. Gender role stereotypes also affect people's understanding of who is beautiful and who is not. People still go to great lengths to try and conform to these unrealistic ideals they see in popular media. They diet, obsessively exercise, and go through plastic surgery.
Gender socialization can cause damage in many ways. Children may witness and absorb harmful practices at home, in their community, and in the media. They may see gender-based violence. Girls' education may be restricted. Menstruation may be stigmatized as impure or taboo. Girls may lack access to information about sexual and reproductive health. Boys may be encouraged to consider violence as manly. Then, as children grow up, they tend to pass these discriminatory norms and practices to their own children.
The belief that raising children is a woman's responsibility can hinder women's careers. Employers do not want to hire young women and prefer to employ men. It is less likely that they will go on paternity leave. It happened with Katia, who had problems finding a job and developing her career. Another common stereotype. It is believed that women are weak and men are strong. In addition, the wife must unquestionably obey her husband, and her views are not taken into account or are considered less important. Such gender stereotypes are often a cause of violence against women. Gender stereotypes limit the ability of women and men to develop their potential, pursue professional careers, and make choices about their lives. Gender stereotypes determine the value of an individual depending on their gender, which is a violation of fundamental human rights. This leads to gender inequality in society. On average, women's salaries in Ukraine are 22% lower than those paid to men, and only 29% of decision-making positions in Ukrainian companies are held by women. Today, there are only a little more than 20% of women among members of the Ukrainian parliament. At the same time, the parliament passes laws that influence the observance of women's rights, their lives and health. Ukraine ranks 59th out of 153 countries in terms of gender equality.
Look at this. Look at this. Do you like a dolly? Should we go for the dolly? There's a good girl. You're a good little girl, aren't you, Sophie? Look, what does this say? Sweet dreams. Sweet dreams. Ooh, look at this, Sophie. Meow, meow. I think she liked that pink dolly the best.
If I were to tell you actually that Sophie is Edward,
Does
that change anything?
I maybe thought, oh, this is a little girl, so I have to give her little girl things.
Solo. Solo. Hello. Hello. Come on.
What's this one? Oh, what's that one do? Is that a robot? What about this? Oh, you like that one? What does this one do? Oliver.
You've gone for, you could say, boy toys for this boy.
Possibly in my subconscious, but for me, I was just going for what was around me, but then perhaps my subconscious was automatically playing a trick on me that I was...
If I tell you that he is actually a girl.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. I suppose it's because of the stereotype.
And then that changed your behaviour towards the child.
It did.
And your behaviour was quite directive.
1, 2, 3. Ah. Beep, 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 beep. Do you want to see my robot?
She's picked up the robot, the car, the puzzle game. And I think she's been much more physical in handling the child than the other adults have been with girls.
That really astounded me because I thought that I was somebody that had a really open mind.
The surprise, so I automatically went for the pink fluffy toy because I said it was a girl, so I was sort of stereotyping.
As people constantly try make a case for socialization being the source of gender differences, there is enough evidence supporting the fact that infant girls have preference for dolls, while boys are more likely to interact with mechanical toys such as cars and trains. These differences are associated with variations in pre- and postnatal androgen exposure, which influence 3D mental rotation skills and visual spatial abilities long before any socialization kicks in. These gender differences at infancy are observable well into adulthood as men and women pick different careers, women going more people-oriented, while men go more things-oriented. Testosterone is associated with higher level of optimism, which is sometimes seen as aggression, as observable among risk-taking behavior more pronounced in financial investors with higher levels of testosterone.
Luckily, as times have changed, so have people's expectations about gender roles. More and more people are free to behave in ways that are true to who they really are, and that is a good thing.
Did you know that this underrepresentation is way stronger in countries that are higher in gender equality? It is shocking that in places like Finland, they have actually fewer women instead than in countries like Saudi Arabia. This is called the gender equality paradox, and it crushes the mainstream idea that when men and women are treated the same, they should act and become the same.
Countries like Finland, Norway and Sweden measured high for gender equality but low for women STEM graduates. For countries like UAE, Tunisia, Turkey and Algeria, it was the other way round. This, by the way, is the UK.
When life satisfaction is higher and when people feel more secure in a society, they feel they can do what they really like. They are less driven by economic interests.
The only female Fields Medal winner, the Fields Medal is like the Nobel Prize of mathematics, was Maryam Mirzakhani, an Iranian-American woman. And I don't think that's a coincidence that she happened to be Iranian. Iran has very good rates of women in science. They don't have the same stereotypes, for some reason, as Europe does. So I think really this reflects a historical fact. This long legacy of exclusion is the reason why in Europe we still see this lag women catching up. We're still working so hard to change the culture.
There are plenty of subjects with big gender gaps that favour women. Of undergraduates whose principal subject is medicine, 55.2% are women. In dentistry, it's 62%. In biological sciences, it's 63%. In veterinary science, it's 77.3%. And in nursing, it's 90.5%. Indeed, taken as a whole, women account for 51.5%, over half of science undergraduate enrolments.
Most subjects at university are dominated by women. There are very few areas, we mentioned engineering and computer science, that are dominated by men, but the gaps there are actually much, much smaller than for things like nursing, teaching, social work, education studies and so on. And I think it'd be much better if we concentrated in getting gender equality across all subject areas rather than just focusing narrowly on STEM.
So why do men and women often end up on different career paths? Why are some occupations so dominated by one gender? The answers, it appears, are far from straightforward.
Imagine we all take a test in maths, science and reading. If we are not good at math and science, but we are incredibly hot at reading, then reading is our academic strength, our personal superpower. In fact, academic strength are like superpowers, helping us to decide what to study. Think about it. We are not good at math, but we are excellent at reading. So would it make sense for us to study a math-heavy subject, like engineering? Probably not. Maybe social sciences would be a better option. Unless we are all masochists, but that's a whole different story. So if there are gender differences in these superpowers, and if a gender equality paradox is also found here, then we might have found our sneaky culprit.
Just go online and look up gender differences in personality cross-culturally. You'll find the relevant studies. They've been done with tens of thousands of people, and what they've showed quite clearly is that in those societies where the most has been done to move the social world into a position of radical equality, and so that would roughly be the Scandinavian countries, because they've done more of that than any other country. The personality differences between men and women maximize. They don't minimize.
There's been studies of human personality conducted all across the world, and psychologists have settled on a standard model that has 5 dimensions, 5 personality dimensions, and then have looked for differences between men and women across countries. And the crucial test was the Scandinavian countries, because the Scandinavians have done a lot to flatten out the sociological landscape for men and women.
Right.
And the consequence of that has actually been that the differences between men and women in Scandinavia have got larger, not only in terms of personality, but also in terms of interest. And interest is, men tend to be interested in things, and women tend to be interested in people. And there's some decent evidence that thing interest is mediated by testosterone exposure in utero, which sounds pretty biological, all things considered. And
when looking at hunter-gatherer societies who lived in settlements and were involved in agricultural activities, humans lived fairly equal lives, sharing responsibility for food, shelter, and raising children. These societies paint a picture of men and women doing the same physical work, with the added burden of having children for women. From an evolutionary sense, physical circumstances influence how bodies are shaped. Basically, bodies evolve to match their environments. Women giving birth, lactating, and raising offspring speaks to women being shaped by evolution. Men's physical labor and their involvement in physically strenuous activities has influenced the observable differences between men and women.
And, I've made the claim that in my classes that I don't buy the distinction between sex and gender, which was invented by John Money back in 1955, a single theorist, and whose ideas I think were quite badly discredited, especially by his involvement in the Johns Hopkins Gender Reassignment Clinic, which shut down just a few years ago. That was his baby, and they decided that gender reassignment surgery was a catastrophe.
If you consider all the men and all the women in the Western world, you'd be hard-pressed to find people who don't want equality for men and women. Sure, we all have varying opinions of how to get that equality, or even what equality actually means, but at our cores, most of us just want things to be fair. However, At the far end of the spectrum, you get a small percentage of extremists, emotionally unbalanced individuals who have an axe to grind and demand to be heard. They band together, and mob mentality quickly sweeps in, which further erodes logic and increases aggressiveness. Extremist mobs all behave in a similar way, whether their cause is political, racial, or gender-based. You get both verbally and physically aggressive behavior, you get attempts to dominate and silence those who disagree with you, and you get attempts at character assassination. Essentially, they become irrational bullies.
Right, I mean, talent's rare, which people don't understand. There's lots of different kinds of talent, but in each domain it's rare. And so it's to everyone's benefit to exploit talented people to the maximal possible degree. So even if you're just selfish, you want to push for equality of opportunity, because the more talented people there are out there, the more cool stuff you get to have, and hopefully the more diverse and interesting your life is. So you can pursue equality of opportunity policies, and the Scandinavians have done that, especially trying to knock down barriers for women in the workplace. And by all accounts, by all standard theories, the Scandinavian countries and places like the Netherlands, Canada to a slightly lesser degree, have gone farther than any other countries in pursuing those policies. Okay, and part of the consequence of that is that some of the differences between men and women have been minimized. So obviously there's far more women in the workplace than there were 40 years ago. And in many occupations, there's actually dominance by women. There's dominance in the universities, there's dominance in the healthcare fields. And so women have poured into the workplace. And hypothetically, there's problems with that because it's put a lot of stress on family structure. But hypothetically, that's for the best. And because it gives people a broader range of choices and it gives everyone access to more talent. So, and then also if you look around the world, you see that one of the best predictors of the probability of economic development in developing countries is the attitude in those countries towards equal rights for women. And it looks causal. The more positively the country is predisposed to female rights, the more likely they are to develop economically. And maybe that's because that indicates that they're open to new ideas or something like that, or open to transformation. So that's one kind of equality. Open up the playing field so that everybody has a chance to compete and cooperate and land where they will. But then the other kind of equality is equality of outcome. And that's often described as equity in today's language. And so the ultimate equity utopia would be take every job, every conceivable kind of job, and then stratify that by every conceivable level of authority within every job. And then ensure that every single category of person is represented in precise proportion to their prevalence in the population. So every job should be 50% women and 50% men, and say 13% non-Western ethnic minority, and whatever that happens to be, and then you could break that down. And otherwise there's evidence of systemic prejudice. Okay, now, first thing to say about that is that's impossible. And the reason it's impossible is because there's no limit to the number of ways that you can categorize people into groups. So you know about sex and ethnicity and race, maybe those are the obvious ones, but now you have gender, and then you have ethnicity, and and then there's attractiveness and intelligence and temperament and height and age and socioeconomic background. And I mean, let's say there's 20, but there's a lot more than that. There's no possible way that you could ever regulate a society so tightly that every single one of those groups was equally represented in every single one of those occupations at every single level of the hierarchy. That is
so they
impossible.
Want to concentrate on the significant ones, which are men and women and race.
Well, yeah, but who's to say those are the significant ones? That's the other thing. It isn't even obvious that they are, because I would say that like a more significant one is cognitive ability, because that's a way bigger predictor of long-term life success than sex or race. So I don't even think that
There are more differences between men and women beyond what is physically observable. There are gender differences in the symptoms for the same illnesses. For example, women are more likely to have insomnia and fatigue in the build-up to a heart attack. For men, chest pains are more common symptoms for a heart attack. Women are as into casual sex as men are, but they still remain to be choosy and often assess the safety aspect of the whole interaction. This could be associated with both socialization and evolution. Men being into casual sex is biologically backed by the fact that they don't get pregnant, and socially, by sexual freedom being more acceptable for men more than for women. From an evolutionary or biological sense, women gestating and lactating means they have to be picky with who they sleep with, as it has to be someone willing to allocate time and resources towards raising their offspring. From a social sense, female chastity is expected in most societies today, playing into things such as consent being female and female sexual abuse being worse than male sexual abuse. Intersex differences are observable even among women. Asian women have fewer menopausal symptoms compared to their Western counterparts, a phenomenon largely attributed to Western women lumping everything together when taking stock of their experiences.